I wasn't even supposed to be upstairs. The bride had disappeared 20 minutes ago, and while everyone assumed she was fixing her makeup or taking a breath before the vows, something in me felt off. The kind of quiet intuition that creeps up behind your ribs and whispers without reason. I wandered up the carpeted stairs while laughter and clinking glasses echoed faintly below. The house was elegant, filled with flowers and expensive stillness, but something about the upper floor felt hollow, like a stage left after the play had ended. I opened doors gently, one after another. Empty bedrooms, a guest bath, a nursery no one mentioned. Then I heard it, a soft, wet sound, like breathing through tears. The closet door in the master suite was slightly ajar, not wide enough to invite, but enough to betray a presence. I walked toward it slowly, like my feet didn't quite belong to me. When I pulled the door open, I saw her, curled up on the floor in her wedding gown, layers of white tulle bunched around her like a broken cloud. Her veil had slipped down, her makeup smeared in streaks across her cheeks. Mascara had pulled beneath her eyes, and her lips were trembling, not from cold, but from something deeper, something raw. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. Her pain filled the space so fully, I felt it like humidity. She sat with her back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, heels pressing into the edge of her train. One hand was clenched into the lace of her skirt, twisting it in small, desperate circles. The other lay limp in her lap, fingers slightly curled, like a forgotten gesture. Her shoulders shook with uneven sobs, quiet but relentless. I knelt down slowly beside her, careful not to startle her, not to disturb the fragile stillness that had wrapped itself around us. The closet smelled of perfume and fabric softener, and something older, panic maybe, or shame. The light from the hallway cast long, soft beams across the floor, catching the glitter on her dress and making it shimmer like frost. Her skin, pale and flushed, was blotchy in a way that betrayed how long she had been sitting there. Her breath came in shallow waves, hitching in her throat, as if her body had decided it didn't want to keep moving forward. There was a bruise on her shoulder, faint but visible, just beneath the translucent strap of her gown. I didn't ask about it. I didn't need to. Some things reveal themselves without explanation. I sat with my knees tucked under me, close but not touching. The air between us was thick with unsaid things, a silence that had weight. She looked like a painting left in the rain, edges blurred, color running. Her head tilted slightly to the side, and only then did her eyes meet mine. Bloodshot, swollen, glossy with tears that hadn't finished falling. She looked at me not with surprise, but with recognition, like she had been waiting for someone to find her, like I had been the one she was hoping for all along. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out, just a slow exhale that collapsed in on itself. Her lips parted slightly, and her eyes widened with something that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't relief either. She looked young, not in age, but in ache, like someone who had just discovered that dreams could rot from the inside. I noticed the way her gown had bunched beneath her thighs, the wrinkled satin, the faint smear of foundation on her neckline. She had tried to hold it together, but something inside her had unraveled. A strand of hair clung to her damp cheek. I reached out without thinking and tucked it behind her ear. Her skin was warm, too warm, flushed with anxiety and pressure and the weight of expectation. She didn't flinch. She leaned, just slightly, into the touch. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't looking at a runaway bride or a scared girl. I was looking at a woman on the edge of something irreversible. A woman who had climbed into a closet, not to hide, but to fall apart where no one would see. I sat back on my heels and tried to breathe evenly, matching her rhythm. Slow inhale, long exhale. She mirrored it without being told. Her sobs softened into tremors. Her shoulders loosened. The gown, once pristine, now looked like it had been through a storm. And she, sitting in the middle of it, looked like the eye. Still, fragile, waiting for something to change. I didn't speak. I let the quiet stretch, let it become a blanket instead of a wall. The moment felt suspended, like time had chosen to pause just for us. I could hear the faint music from downstairs. Someone had started dancing. The sounds of celebration, laughter, clinking glassware, it all felt like it belonged to another planet. Here, in this closet, everything was stripped down to breath, fabric, skin, silence. I realized I had reached out again. My hand rested gently on her arm now, my thumb brushing slowly over a small patch of bare skin. Her eyes closed at the contact, not in resistance, but in surrender, a slow, tired surrender. The train of her dress sprawled across the floor, catching dust and light. I had never seen anything so heartbreakingly beautiful. Her vulnerability was so pure it hurt to look at. I wanted to wrap her in something, my arms, my breath, my understanding. But I didn't move. I just stayed with her, in the soft hush of linen and tears and breath, waiting for whatever would come next. She didn't speak right away. After the silence settled between us like dust, she slowly uncurled her legs, letting the folds of her wedding gown drape heavily over the floor. Her body moved with the hesitant grace of someone learning how to breathe again after holding it in too long. She wiped at her cheeks with the back of her hand, smearing what was left of her mascara across pale skin. Her eyes, though red-rimmed, held a strange clarity now. Not peace, not relief, but a raw steadiness, like she had finally stopped running, at least from herself. She shifted her weight and sat up straighter, her back still pressed against the wall of the closet. I watched her chest rise and fall slowly, deliberately, as if she were choosing each breath with caution. Her hands rested in her lap now, fingers lightly clutching a small piece of lace from her dress that had come loose at the seam. Her grip on it tightened, then loosened, then tightened again. I could sense something building, not panic this time, but conviction. Her lips moved before her voice emerged, as if she had to coax the words from wherever they had been buried. The sound was quiet, almost too soft to register at first, but it filled the space between us like smoke. She didn't look at me when she said it. Her eyes were fixed on the ceiling, on some point above our heads that only she could see. Her mouth formed the words with certainty. I don't want to marry him. Simple, flat, unornamented, but the weight of it hit me in the chest like a wave. She exhaled, shoulders collapsing forward, as though speaking it aloud had drained something vital. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, I realized, but from the freedom of saying something she had held inside for too long. I waited, still kneeling beside her, not moving, not reacting, just holding space for the truth that had just cracked the surface of everything this day was supposed to be. She began to speak again, her voice steadier now, though it wavered around the edges. I could see the thoughts rolling through her, gathering like storm clouds. Fragments of emotion sharpened by guilt, by exhaustion, by the unbearable weight of everyone else's expectations. She spoke in fragments, in unfinished sentences that unraveled from her mouth like tangled thread. Not ready, not the right person, too much noise, too many eyes. None of this felt like hers. She lifted her hands and looked at them, almost as if checking to see if they were still real. The engagement ring on her finger caught a sliver of hallway light and sparkled cruelly. She stared at it for a long moment, then slowly, carefully, slid it off. Her fingers trembled again as she held it in her palm. I could see the indentation it had left on her skin, a faint reddened mark, a ghost of a promise she no longer wanted to keep. She extended her arms slightly and held the ring out, not toward me, not offering it, but simply needing it to exist somewhere other than her hand. She placed it gently on the floor between us, as though it might shatter if dropped too quickly. The moment she let go of it, her entire posture changed. Her spine straightened, her shoulders pulled back, her eyes finally found mine. There was something in her expression I hadn't seen before, not just pain or confusion, but defiance, a quiet, terrifying kind of defiance, the kind that doesn't scream or tremble, but simply refuses to keep pretending. Her mouth parted again and more words came. She didn't love him, not the way she thought she should. She had tried, God, she had tried. But every time he touched her, every time he spoke about their future, something in her recoiled, not from fear, but from falseness. She had said yes because it was expected, because it was easier to follow the script than to rip up the page. She closed her eyes briefly and let her head fall back against the wall. Her voice dropped lower, nearly inaudible, as she admitted something else, something that curled in the space between us like smoke. She had known for a while that this wasn't right, that she couldn't do it, but no one had ever asked her if she wanted to stop. They had only ever asked how excited she was, how beautiful she felt in the dress, how lucky she must be. No one had asked the one question that mattered most. She opened her eyes and looked at me again. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick with unspoken gratitude, with a desperate kind of hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone in this. I didn't reach for her. I didn't speak. But my stillness was its own answer. I saw her swallow hard, her throat tightening, and she reached up to unclasp the delicate buttons at the back of her gown. Her hands fumbled at first, then grew more purposeful. One by one, the tiny buttons gave way, and the fabric began to loosen. She shifted forward slightly and turned her back toward me, lifting her hair away from her neck with both hands. Her spine was straight, shoulders bare, the upper edge of the gown beginning to slip. The room felt impossibly warm. Her skin glowed faintly in the hallway light, smooth and exposed and trembling. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. I reached out, slowly, placing my fingers on the last few buttons, feeling her back rise and fall beneath my touch. Her breath hitched slightly when I touched her, and I hesitated for a heartbeat before continuing. Each button I undid felt like a match struck in the dark, a small, deliberate act of unraveling. When the final button gave way, the gown loosened completely, and she let it fall. The fabric pooled silently at her feet, a collapsed symbol of everything she had just shed. She stepped out of it without a word and stood before me in nothing but lace and vulnerability. Her back was to me still, but her silence spoke louder than anything else could have. I stayed kneeling, the gown now draped partly across my lap, the scent of her skin lingering in the air. She turned around slowly. Her chest rose and fell, bare shoulders drawn back, eyes steady. The curve of her collarbone, the sharp line of her jaw, the quiet defiance in her posture, it all struck me at once. She wasn't lost anymore. She had made a choice, and somehow I had been chosen to witness it. It didn't fall all at once. The gown surrendered in stages, slowly, softly, almost like it was apologizing for the weight it had carried. First, the bodice slipped lower on her torso, bearing more of her back, exposing the fine line of her spine, the delicate curve of her shoulders. The satin began to slide, inch by inch, its movement marked only by the faint whisper of fabric against skin. My fingers hovered just beneath the last undone button, and I held my breath without realizing it. Her hands were still in her hair, arms raised, the pose unintentional, but quietly devastating. She wasn't covering herself. She wasn't hiding. She was simply letting go. The dress bunched briefly at her hips, as if reluctant to fall further. Then, with a single shift of her weight, it gave way completely, gliding down her body in a fluid motion that felt both sacred and irreversibly intimate. It gathered at her feet in a cloud of white, layers folding over one another in soft, defeated ripples. The train spread outward like wings, and she stepped out of it slowly, barefoot, careful not to tear the silence that had settled over us like a second skin. She stood in the middle of the room, facing me now, wearing only a strapless slip of ivory lace, barely more than a whisper of fabric. Her skin looked impossibly smooth beneath the dim light, dusted with gold where the sun reached through the edge of the hallway. Her collarbones cast delicate shadows. Her thighs, partially visible beneath the lace, held a subtle tension that made my chest ache. There was no performance in her body, no seduction, only truth. I remained kneeling, my knees pressed into the carpet, her dress still draped across my thighs like a fallen banner. I could feel the imprint of its warmth, the trace of her form lingering in the fabric. The scent of perfume and sweat and something more primal drifted up from it, and I found myself unable to move. The room felt altered, slower, like the air had thickened around us, too heavy with possibility to breathe easily. Her eyes met mine, and everything stilled. The music from downstairs, the distant clatter of plates, the soft hum of voices, all of it fell away. There was only her, standing there in that near-naked vulnerability, and me holding the discarded symbol of a life she no longer wanted. She took a step forward, and I watched the way her thighs brushed, the lace clinging slightly before releasing. Her hands dropped to her sides, palms open, fingers gently curled. Her mouth parted as if to speak, but she didn't. She didn't need to. I rose slowly, not out of urgency, but necessity, drawn upward like a tide being pulled. We stood so close that I could feel the heat radiating from her body. The scent of her shampoo mingled with the faintest trace of her skin, clean, warm, electric. My hands hovered near her waist, unsure, trembling slightly. I could see her chest rising and falling more quickly now, breath catching in the space between us. Her eyes never wavered. They searched mine, not for permission, but for understanding. I let my fingers brush against her hip, the lace cool and soft beneath my touch. She didn't flinch. Her skin rose beneath my fingertips, a ripple of goosebumps traveling across her side. I traced upward, over the curve of her waist, feeling the shallow rhythm of her breath just beneath the surface. She leaned into the contact, subtly, deliberately. Her hand came up and rested lightly on my shoulder, the weight of it grounding and electric all at once. I let my palm flatten against her lower back, guiding her a half step closer. Our bodies didn't touch fully, yet, but the warmth between us pulsed like a live current. She tilted her head slightly, her lips parting again, and I lowered mine toward her neck. I didn't kiss her, not yet. I only let my breath graze her skin, watching the way her lashes fluttered and her shoulders trembled. The intimacy in that nearness felt more powerful than any touch. My other hand slid along the side of her thigh, stopping just above the lace's edge. Her skin there was even warmer, softer, and I could feel the faint tremor in her muscles, the tension of restraint. She exhaled sharply when my hand moved behind her knee, and she leaned into me more fully, the front of her body finally pressing to mine. Her breath hitched. Mine caught with it. We moved, as if choreographed by silence. She guided my hand to the hem of her slip, lifting it slowly, inch by inch, exposing more of herself with each breath. Her skin glowed under my touch, and I let my fingers trail upward, exploring the shape of her hips, the hollow between her ribs, the curve of her waist. When my lips finally met hers, it was soft, almost reverent, a meeting, not a conquest, a question, not a demand. Her mouth yielded, warm and pliant, the kiss deepening gradually until I lost myself in it. Her hands found my sides, then my neck, pulling me closer with a quiet desperation. I felt her breath rush against my cheek, the small gasps that came as I slid my hands further under her slip, finding the warm hollow of her back and the trembling tension just above the curve of her hips. Her thighs pressed together for a moment, then slowly parted as she guided my leg between them, anchoring herself. The gown at my feet was no longer just a dress. It was a symbol of what she had escaped, of what she had chosen instead. The weight of it grounded me, reminded me that this wasn't a dream. Her body pressed to mine was real, the urgency in her breath, the way her fingers dug gently into my back, the subtle, rhythmic movement of her hips against my thigh. It was all real, and it was all new, terrifying, sacred. Her head fell back slightly, exposing her throat, and I kissed along its length, feeling the way her pulse fluttered beneath my lips. My hands found the small of her back and drew her closer until there was no space left between us. Her skin was damp with heat, and I felt her shudder as I traced slow, spiraling patterns against her spine. Her hands tangled in my hair, anchoring herself to something she hadn't known she needed. The slip came up over her head with effort, clinging to her skin for one last moment before sliding free. She stood before me now, bare, eyes full of something wordless and immense. She looked at me not with shame, but with absolute clarity. And in that moment, surrounded by a room full of discarded silk and fading daylight, I saw her as she truly was for the first time. Not a bride, not a runaway, not a girl, a woman choosing herself, and somehow choosing me too. The light that slipped through the hotel curtains was muted and gray, the kind of morning light that carries no warmth, just a dull, diffused truth. It made everything look quieter, heavier, like the world was holding its breath. I lay on top of the covers, fully clothed except for my shoes, one leg bent, arms crossed over my chest, eyes locked on the ceiling as if it might offer some sort of answer. She was still asleep beside me, curled toward the wall, her breathing steady, her body small against the vastness of the bed. The sheets were tangled around her waist, her back bare, the delicate line of her shoulder blades catching the morning in soft shadows. I hadn't slept. My mind had been restless with images, fragments, the kind that loop endlessly and without order. The sound of her dress falling, the taste of her skin, the way her breath had hitched against my throat, her whispered moans pressed into the hollow space between my collarbone and jaw, the look in her eyes right before she had pulled me on top of her, tender, terrified, but certain. And now, morning, cold, unblinking, and indifferent. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the curve of her hip beneath the sheet. There was a stillness to her sleep, a surrender I hadn't seen in her before. She looked peaceful, but not untouched. There was a new tension in the air, one I couldn't name. Not regret, but not relief either. The room still carried the scent of her perfume, faint and floral, but underneath it lingered something deeper, something unmistakably human. Sweat, skin, breath. I inhaled it without meaning to and felt a sudden ache bloom in my chest. I sat up slowly, careful not to shift the mattress too much. My legs ached from staying in the same position for hours, and my mouth was dry, lips chapped from wine and kisses. I stood and walked quietly to the small kitchenette, where I poured myself a glass of water and drank it in long, slow gulps. My reflection in the microwave door startled me. My hair was tangled, my face worn, lips swollen. I looked like someone else. Or maybe I just looked more like myself than I had in years. There was a sharp knock inside my chest, the kind that comes when your body realizes something your mind isn't ready to admit. She didn't go back. There had been no wedding, no husband, no ceremony, no bouquet tossed, no champagne toast, just a dress on the closet floor and a girl who fell apart into my hands. I leaned against the counter and stared at the digital clock glowing green on the stove. 8:15. By now, the guests would have realized. The mother of the groom would be pacing. The bride's father would be checking his phone with a clenched jaw. The groom. God, the groom. What had he thought when the door stayed shut, when she didn't walk down the aisle? I walked back to the bed, slower this time, and sat on the edge, careful not to wake her. Her arm was draped across the pillow where I had once been lying. Her fingers twitched slightly in her sleep. I watched her for a long time, not because I was lost in the beauty of her, but because I didn't know what this meant, what any of it meant. The night had happened like a fire, quick, consuming, undeniable. But fire doesn't ask permission. It just burns. I touched her hair gently, brushing it back from her face. She stirred, a soft noise catching in her throat, and her eyes fluttered open. For a second, she looked lost. Then she saw me, and her features softened, but didn't quite settle. She sat up slowly, clutching the sheet to her chest, her eyes scanning the room like she was trying to anchor herself. I handed her the water without a word, and she drank it without looking at me. The silence between us was no longer soft. It had grown denser, more aware of itself. She turned her face toward the window, watching the light stretch across the floor. Her voice, when it finally came, was hoarse and low, barely more than a breath. I nodded without answering. She didn't apologize. I didn't offer reassurance. We didn't fall into the old patterns of comfort or explanation. Whatever we had stepped into, it wasn't familiar, it wasn't safe, but it was real. She stood, pulling the sheet tighter around her, and walked to the suitcase she'd left by the door. She unzipped it carefully, methodically, choosing clothes without pause. I sat on the edge of the bed and watched as she dressed. Her movements were quiet, efficient, devoid of hesitation. A tank top, sweatpants, hair pulled into a loose knot. She looked like herself again, or maybe a version of herself I had never met. She didn't look at me as she put on her shoes. She sat on the bench by the door, lacing them slowly, fingers trembling just slightly. Then she stood, adjusted the strap of her bag over her shoulder, and looked at me. Our eyes met across the room. There was no bitterness, no longing, just a mutual understanding that whatever had passed between us wasn't something either of us could name. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the knob, and glanced back once. Her face held something unreadable, something soft, something sharp. Then she left. The door clicked shut behind her with a sound so final it made my chest ache. I sat in the silence she left behind, the sheets still warm, her scent still clinging to my skin. The day moved forward without waiting for me to catch up. Traffic hummed outside, a car honked. Somewhere a phone rang. But inside this room, time had folded in on itself. I remained there, still and quiet, in the aftermath of a wedding that never was, in the center of a storm no one else saw coming. It was raining when she came back. Not the soft kind of rain that feels like forgiveness, but the cold, slicing kind that seeps through your clothes and settles into your bones. I heard the knock before I saw her, 3 sharp raps on the door. Not tentative, not polite, just enough to make me stop what I was doing and feel something clench inside my chest. I opened the door and she was there, standing in the hallway, soaked through. Her hood was down, hair clinging to her cheeks, eyes wide and wet and unreadable. She wasn't carrying anything except her silence. No suitcase, no purse, just her, small and trembling and utterly changed. I didn't speak. I stepped aside. She walked past me without looking back. The door closed behind her with a soft thud, and I turned slowly, unsure what to do with my hands, my breath, my heart. She stood in the middle of the room like she didn't remember it, like the space had rearranged itself in her absence. She peeled off her hoodie, soaked and heavy, and let it fall to the floor. Her shirt clung to her torso, translucent in places, the outline of her bra faint beneath the wet fabric. Her chest rose and fell in slow, measured breaths. She was shivering. I handed her a towel without saying anything. She took it, pressed it to her face, then to her neck, her arms. She didn't speak either. We stood there in the living room, surrounded by the quiet hum of the radiator, the occasional groan of old pipes, the steady tick of the wall clock. Time hadn't moved while she was gone. Or maybe it had, and I simply hadn't noticed. I had gone through the days like a machine, doing laundry, making coffee, watching TV with the sound off. She had left behind something inside me, and it hadn't stopped echoing. When she finally looked at me, her expression was tight, held together by threads. There were dark circles under her eyes. Her lips were dry, but her gaze, there was something in it I hadn't seen before, a rawness that hadn't dulled, a question that hadn't been answered. She stepped toward me slowly, not quite cautious, not quite brave. I stood still, letting her close the distance. Her fingers brushed against mine, lightly, barely, and then curled around my hand. Her skin was cold. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence between us had changed shape. It wasn't heavy now. It was electric. I could feel it in my shoulders, in my chest, in the pit of my stomach. She leaned in, resting her forehead against mine, and we stood there like that, breathing each other in, letting the rain drip from her hair onto my shirt. I led her to the bedroom, not out of obligation, not out of habit, but because I couldn't bear to leave her standing in the threshold. She sat on the edge of the bed, legs apart, elbows on her knees, staring at the floor. I kneeled in front of her, my hands resting on her thighs, thumbs tracing slow circles into the denim of her jeans. She looked down at me with an expression that shattered whatever defenses I had managed to rebuild. Her hand reached for my cheek, tentative at first, then firm. I closed my eyes and leaned into her palm. She pulled me into her without a word. We moved like people who remembered every inch of each other. Her kisses were deep, unhurried, tasting of rain and something bitter underneath. We undressed slowly, almost reverently, peeling off the layers that had collected over 2 weeks of absence. Her body was warmer now, flushed with heat, her skin reacting to mine like we had never been apart. Her breath quickened as I kissed her chest, her stomach, the inside of her thighs. She arched into me, hands tangled in my hair, soft sounds spilling from her lips like confessions. When I moved between her legs and let my mouth find her, she gasped, a sharp, broken sound that made my spine tighten. Her thighs trembled, her hips rose to meet me, desperate and uncontrolled. I took my time. I wanted to relearn the shape of her need, the rhythm of her pleasure, the way she unraveled when I pushed her to the edge and held her there. Her moans grew louder, more erratic, her body pulling taut beneath my hands. When she finally came, it was with a cry muffled against the back of her hand, her body jerking, then softening all at once. We lay tangled together afterward, sweat cooling between us, her breath warm against my shoulder. She clung to me like a raft, arms wrapped tight around my ribs, legs tangled in mine. I stroked her hair in slow, steady motions, my fingers trailing along the nape of her neck, down her spine, up again. She didn't cry, but her breathing caught sometimes, little hitches that told me more than tears could. The sky outside darkened slowly, and the rain kept falling. We didn't move. We didn't speak. I held her like something I wasn't ready to lose again, like something I didn't know how to keep. Her body was soft, pliant, fitting perfectly into every hollow of mine. But there was something in the way she gripped me, tight, almost too tight, that made me wonder if she was afraid she might vanish again, or worse, that I would let her. She fell asleep with her head on my chest, fingers still curled in the fabric of my shirt. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the rain, the hum of the heater, the rhythm of her breath. She had come back, but I didn't know for how long. I didn't know what she wanted. I only knew that in that moment, with her body wrapped around mine and the ghost of her voice still in my mouth, I would have let her stay forever, even if it broke me again. It happened on a Sunday morning. The air was thick with that slow, honeyed quiet that only comes after a night of too much truth. The light filtered in through the sheer curtains and gold ribbons, falling across the sheets, warming the tips of her shoulders where the blanket had slipped away. She lay curled against me, naked and soft, her legs slung over mine, her fingers gently tangled in my hair as if she had fallen asleep mid-touch and never let go. Her breath was steady, almost rhythmic, ghosting across my collarbone in warm bursts that stirred something raw and deep in my chest. I had one arm wrapped around her waist, the other resting on the curve of her hip, and for a long time I didn't move. I just watched the light move across the ceiling, slowly, slowly, as if the world was trying to delay whatever was coming. Her clothes were still on the floor, crumpled and careless. The robe she sometimes wore after showers hung open on the back of the chair, forgotten. Her bra lay twisted near the foot of the bed, like something abandoned in the middle of an escape. My shirt was somewhere underneath us, pulled halfway off during a kiss that had turned too urgent to bother with direction. The air still smelled of us, skin, sweat, shampoo, breath. The room was saturated with everything that had happened the night before. It didn't feel wrong. It didn't feel like a mistake, but it also didn't feel like something the world was ready to understand. The knock was sudden, impatient, not loud, but sharp. One, then another. Then the door creaked open before I could react. Her mother, cheerful, almost joking, floating into the apartment as if she'd done it 100 times before. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked as her steps drew closer, heels clicking faintly on the wood floor. I didn't have time to think. I didn't have time to breathe. She walked past the kitchen, then the hallway, then the bedroom door opened. Just a little, just enough. She didn't scream. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She stood there, one hand still on the doorknob, the other hanging limp at her side. Her face, God, her face was a portrait of something between confusion, recognition, and disbelief. Her eyes dropped immediately to the bed, to where her daughter's bare back was half exposed in the sheets, to where my arm was unmistakably wrapped around her, fingers resting along her ribs. My own body was barely covered, and the sheet had slipped low enough to show more skin than not. There was no mistaking what she had walked into, no possible room for doubt. Her daughter didn't wake. She shifted slightly, murmured something in sleep, and nuzzled closer into my neck. I felt the press of her lips against my skin, unconscious and tender. My eyes never left the woman in the doorway. I didn't cover myself. I didn't speak. I didn't reach for excuses or explanations. I simply stared, waiting, held captive by the stillness of her reaction. Something passed across her face then, something I couldn't name. Not rage, not heartbreak, something worse, something colder, the quiet violence of comprehension. She stepped into the room. She moved slowly, deliberately, each step louder than the last. I didn't move. Her eyes locked on mine, and for a brief second there was something unspoken between us. Not understanding, not forgiveness, something more ancient, more dangerous. She walked around to my side of the bed. I thought she might hit me, or scream, or cry, but she didn't. She reached down and touched her daughter's hair, just lightly, just a brush of fingers. Then her eyes drifted back to mine. She leaned closer, her hand, cold, manicured, sure, lifted to my face. She touched my cheek, not roughly, not gently either. Her fingers lingered there for a beat too long. And then she kissed me, a soft, dry kiss, pressed against my mouth like a warning, or a threat, or both. I didn't move, couldn't. When she pulled away, she said nothing. Her gaze flicked down to her daughter's sleeping form once more. Then she turned and walked out. No questions, no tears, just the sound of her footsteps fading into the hallway. The front door clicked shut moments later. That quiet settled over the apartment again, but it was different now. Not warm, not still, heavy, watching. She never said a word. She never came back. But sometimes, even now, I swear I can still feel the imprint of her mouth on mine. Cold, calculated, and unforgettable.